With question 54 of the Summa Theologia, we get into what we call Angelic Epistemology, or the knowledge of the angels. And so we're no longer talking about the movement of angels or whether an angel is in a place or not. And now it has to do with what can an angel know. And as we go through the 5 articles of this particular question of the Summa, what you should understand is that what is really on St. Thomas Aquinas' mind here is comparing the angelic knowledge to the divine knowledge and also to human knowledge. Now, we have not yet gotten into human epistemology. We're going to have a whole series of questions on human nature. We haven't gotten there yet, but we did have questions on divine knowledge. And so you understand that basically, not only does God know everything, but all things exist in God, okay? And so you're going to see that a lot of what Aquinas is asking in these articles in question 54 is trying to distinguish the angelic knowledge from the divine knowledge, saying, okay, the divine knowledge is something really unique, really special. Angelic knowledge is awesome, but it's not that, okay? And it's also not human knowledge. It's going to be very different. It's right in between. And also that is significant because if we want to understand God, a way of further understanding God is to understand angelic knowledge, because it's kind of like on the way there. It's not divine knowledge, but there are a lot of similarities, and in many ways God's knowledge is more similar to angelic knowledge than it is to human knowledge. Okay, so the first article is whether an angel's act of understanding is his substance. Now, this is going to be the first instance where St. Thomas Aquinas is trying to say, okay, God's act of knowledge is his substance, but that's not going to be the case for angels. A substance, by the way, is just an individual thing. It can either be a composite, like a matter and form coming together, or it can be something like an angel. An angel doesn't have any physicality or material aspect to it, but it is still a substance, okay? It's a thing, I guess you could say. Thomas says it is impossible for the action of an angel or any creature to be its own substance. For an action is properly the actuality of a power, just as existence is the actuality of a substance or of an essence. Now, it is impossible for anything which is not pure act, but which has some admixture of potentiality to be its own actuality. Now, again, remember when we talked about simplicity as the first attribute of God, a couple of the key terms were this actuality and potentiality. And I said back then in that article, that question, that a good definition of God is the pure act of being, okay? He's total act, no potentiality. So Aquinas is saying that's not the case with the angels. They do have potentiality, okay? They're not pure act, and so they can't be their own substance. Because actuality is opposed to potentiality, but God alone is pure act. Hence, only God is his substance. Hence, only in God is his substance the same as his existence and his action. Okay, this all goes back to simplicity, and that's, as I mentioned back then, why it was the first, and I would say the most important attribute of God, is because all the other ones and things like this are dependent upon understanding God in his simplicity. Besides, if an angel's act of understanding were his substance, it would be necessary for it to be subsisting, which means it's all on its own, right? Now, a subsisting act of intelligence can be but one, just as an abstract thing that subsists. Consequently, an angel's substance would neither be distinguished from God's substance, which is his very act of understanding, subsisting in itself, nor from the substance of another angel. So, he's saying, well, if the angel was his intelligence and the power of his knowledge was his substance, then he would be the same as God, and there'd be no differentiation between them. Also, if an angel were his own act of understanding, there could then be no degrees of understanding more or less perfectly, for this comes about through the diverse participation of the act of understanding. All right, so God is the ultimate in knowledge, okay? He knows all things. He contains all things within himself. So every other intelligent creature like us or the angels participates in that, but is not it itself. Article 2, whether in the angel to understand is to exist. So again, this is comparing something that we've already learned about God, that he is his own existence, his essence, his existence, his suppositum, all these things are the same thing. Aquinas says the action of an angel, as also the action of any creature, is not his existence. Okay, so you and I exist, but that's not who we are. We are not our existence, and we know that because, there were a number of years ago we didn't exist at all. And so we came into existence, whereas God never came into existence. He is the uncaused cause and the unmoved mover, right? Now, the being of every creature is restricted to one in genus and species. God's being alone is simply infinite. All right, again, there's one of his attributes. Comprehending all things in itself, as Dionysius says. Hence, the divine nature alone is its own act of understanding and its own act of will. Article 3, whether an angel's power of intelligence is his essence. Okay, so you're running through all these aspects of God, that he is his existence, he is substance, he is essence, okay? And again, Aquinas is just making sure that everybody understands that the angels are not God, okay? That even though they're invisible, their act and will, their intelligence and will, they're not God, they are creatures. Neither in an angel nor in any creature is the power of operative faculty the same as the essence, which is made evident thus. Since every power is ordained to an act, then according to the diversity of acts must be the diversity of powers, and on this account it is said that each proper act responds to its proper power, but in every creature the essence differs from the existence and is compared to it as potentiality to act, as is evident from what has been already said. Now, the act to which the operative power is compared is operation, but in the angel, to understand is not the same as to exist, nor in any operation in him, nor in any other created thing, the same as his existence. Hence, the angel's essence is not the power of intelligence, nor is it the essence of any creature. Nor is the essence of any creature its power of operation. We have all these things that are separate, our will and our intellect and our essence and our substance, and these are all related to each other, but they're not the same thing. With God, it's all the same thing, and that is what is his simplicity. Article 4, whether there is an active and a passive intellect in an angel. Now, this is interesting because in the treatise on human nature, he's going to talk about the active and the passive intellect. He hasn't mentioned it yet. So now he's asking whether an angel has these attributes that humans have, but he hasn't yet explained what they are, but he'll somewhat go into it now, and much more so in the treatise on human nature. All right, so the necessity for admitting a passive intellect in us is derived from the fact that we understand sometimes only in potentiality and not actually. All right, so I don't want to get into this too much because there's going to be a whole lot more on the treatise on human nature, but we have an active, we have a passive intellect. The passive is what we potentially know, which is all things potentially. The active is what actually lights up the potentiality and makes it real. So with angels, the knowledge is infused at the moment of their creation, so they don't have potentiality and actuality. It's all kind of the same, right? Hence, there must exist some power which, previous to the act of understanding, is in potentiality to intelligible things, but which becomes actuated in their regard when it apprehends them, and still more when it reflects upon them. Now, he's talking about human beings here, though what angels don't have, but what humans do. This is the power which is denominated the passive intellect. The necessity for admitting an active intellect is due to this, that the natures of the material things which we understand do not exist outside the soul as immaterial and actual intelligible, but are only intelligible in potentiality so long as they are outside the soul. All right, and again, this is interesting because it's a question about angelic knowledge, but he's really talking about human knowledge here. And his whole point is that angels don't have this, but in saying that angels don't have this, he's explaining what humans have before we get to the treatise Human Nature. So it's very odd that he's really highlighting what he's going to be talking about in much more depth later. Consequently, it is necessary that there should be some power capable of rendering such natures actually intelligible, and this power in us is called the active intellect. But each of these necessities is absent from the angels. They are neither sometimes understanding only in potentiality with regard to such things as they naturally apprehend. Now, this is interesting also because there is some potentiality in angels. Like, for example, my guardian angel and your guardian angel doesn't know what we're going to eat for breakfast tomorrow morning because they don't know the future. So that's potential knowledge. But what Thomas is talking about here is the knowledge that's natural to them. That's what was infused in them the moment they were created. And we'll go more into this later. But that's what he's saying here. That there's no potentiality there. It's all infused. Okay, are there intelligible... Okay, so he says, they are neither sometimes understanding only in potentiality with regard to such things as they naturally apprehend, nor again are they intelligible in potentiality, but they are actually such. For they first and principally understand immaterial things, as will appear later. Therefore, there cannot be an active and a passive intellect in them except equivocally. Okay, so in a very different way, but really they just don't have these qualities. Okay, the natural knowledge that they have is not active and passive like it is with us. Okay, finally, article number 5, whether there is only intellectual knowledge in the angels. He says, in our soul, there are certain powers whose operations are exercised by corporeal organs. Such powers are acts of sundry parts of the body, as sight of the eye and hearing of the ear. There are some other powers of the soul whose operations are not performed through bodily organs, as intellect and will. That's one of the things that I found so interesting when I started studying the Summa Theologia, was that our intellect is not in our brain. The brain is related to our intellect, but our intellect is outside of the corporeal body. It's something that, I don't mean physically outside, but it's not part of an organ. That's what Thomas is getting at. These are not acts of any part of the body. Now, the angels have no bodies naturally joined to them, as is manifest from what has been said already. Hence, of the soul's powers, only intellect and will can belong to them. All right, first it may be replied that, okay, then he's talking about the objections to this question, and he's saying here that some of the early philosophers assumed that angels had bodies, and that was because of the limitation of our being able to understand things, is that we can't really understand something that doesn't have a body because we learn everything through our senses, right? And then finally he says, experience can be attributed to the angels according to the likeness of the things known, although not by the likeness of the faculty knowing them. We have experience when we know single objects through the senses. The angels likewise know single objects, as we shall show, yet not through the senses. So could an angel have knowledge of this pen? Yes, but it doesn't know physical things. It doesn't have eyes, so it can't see this pen, or it doesn't see this wallet. But how does it know individual things if it can't see them? Because that's how we know the individual things, is because we see them through our senses. But what Aquinas is saying here is that it's just going to be different. All right. But memory can be allowed in the angels, according to Augustine. He puts it in the mind, although it cannot belong to them insofar as it is part of the sensitive soul. In like fashion, a perverted fantasy is attributed to demons, since they have a false practical estimate of what is the true good, while deception in us comes properly from the fantasy, whereby we sometimes hold fast to images of things as to the things themselves, as is manifest in sleepers and lunatics. Okay, so we get into dreams here and things that pop into our dreams that we saw previously. And so there's a lot in question 54, but I think if you're just going to, just the crux of it, what is Thomas getting at here? He's trying to say the angels' minds are very different from God. The angels are creatures, so they don't have some of those same attributes of God. And they're also very different from human beings because we come to know everything through our senses, and angels, not having senses, have to come to know things very differently. There will be more on angels and epistemology in the coming questions. It's very interesting, so stay tuned. But that'll do it for question 54. Thanks for joining me as we move through the Summa, one question at a time. God bless you. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us.